Last time we spoke about the Jiangqiao campaign and the resistance of Zhanshan. Zhanshan was born into poverty in 1885 and he rose to prominence through his exceptional skills and military service. Appointed acting governor of Liaozhong province, during the 1931 Mukden Incident, he defied orders to surrender to Japanese forces. Leading a spirited defense of Nanjing Bridge, Zhanshan's troops repelled repeated Japanese assaults, facing heavy casualties. His resistance inspired national pride and drew global attention. Ultimately, outnumbered, Zhanshan's forces retreated, but his bravery became a symbol of Chinese resistance to the invasion. On December the 7th, Japanese and puppet troops attacked Sanjiangfang, but Chinese forces led by Zhanshan mounted a fierce counterattack, inflicting heavy casualties. Despite being heavily outnumbered and lacking resources, the defenders showcased remarkable bravery, even shooting down an enemy aircraft. After intense fighting, Zhanshan's troops withdrew to avoid further losses, facing starvation and exhaustion. Though Qiqihar ultimately fell to the Japanese, Zhanshan's resistance inspired national pride and calls for unity against the invaders, drawing support from all across China. This episode is the First Tientsin Incident. Welcome back to the Fall and Rise of China podcast. I'm your dutiful host, Greg Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about the history of Asia. Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on the history of Asia and so much more. So go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War found on all major podcast platforms. Over on YouTube, I just released a comedic episode highlighting how to play the USSR in the game Axis and Allies. And over on Echoes of War, we just finished our 4-part series covering who were the best admirals, generals, and air commanders of World War II. If you'd like to further support me, please check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. By joining either, you get access to the exclusive podcast, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. The most recent exclusive podcast is How the Sicilian Mafia Helped the Allies During World War II. This episode is going to be dealing with a very old friend of ours, Mr. Colonel Kenji Dohara. Now, I don't think I dabbled too much into the early history of Dohara, so where better to start? Dohara was born in Okayama City of Okayama Prefecture in 1883. He attended military preparatory schools in his youth, and he would graduate 16th in his class at the Imperial Japanese Army Academy in 1904. His first assignment was to an infantry regiment as a junior officer, before he returned to school when he graduated 24th in his class at the Army Staff College in 1912. During his military and academic years, he learned how to speak Mandarin fluently, alongside picking up some other Chinese language dialects. Because of his language skills, he was chosen for military intelligence, specifically targeting China. During the early 1920s, he took up various postings in northern China. During 1921 to 1922, he took part in the Siberian intervention. In 1926, he was attached to the 2nd IJ Regiment, the next year, the 3rd IJ Regiment. By 1928, he took an official tour of China, attached to the 1st IJ Division. It was that same year he was made a military advisor to none other than Jiang Zuolin, whose death he most certainly had a heavy hand in. In 1929, he received a promotion to colonel, and he was given command of the IJA 30th Regiment. Then in 1931, he was made head of the Special Service Section of the Kwangtung Army, stationed in Mukden. Now, I think as we are quite familiar with, Dohara was part of the team that engineered the Mukden incident. It was he who ordered Lieutenant Sumori Komoto to place and detonate the bomb on the tracks. Dohara would become a key agent during the conquest of Manchuria, being one of those specialists who helped facilitate cooperation between the Manchurian officials, such as Jiang Haipeng, Jiang Qinghui, and Xi Cha. However, Dohara also performed covert operations during this time period, quite bold in scale. Believe it or not, one of these rather insane operations would be to try and restore the Qing dynasty. Shocking, I know. Who would want that old corrupt thing restored? You would be surprised how many old Manchu loyalists were still kicking around, and how many youth saw China to be in such a pit of despair they would actually rather turn back the clock to a time they assumed was better for China. The Japanese had sunk their teeth into 2 provinces of Manchuria and only needed to seize the last one for total conquest of China's northeast. On September the 22nd, a secret meeting was held in the Kwangtung Army Chief of Staff office. There, Dohara presented a new plan to ensure the establishment of a new puppet state in Manchuria and possibly Inner Mongolia. The plan was to kidnap the last emperor of the Qing dynasty, Puyi. After the Xinai Revolution, Puyi continued to live in the Forbidden City. However, in 1924, he was expelled by Feng Yusung, and he took refuge in the Japanese concession in Tientsin. Puyi had met with many Japanese military and civilian officials during his stay in Tientsin. Puyi had a distant relative and an occasional house guest named Yoshiko Kawashima, who just happened to be a close confidant of Dohara. Dohara and his like-minded colleagues presented Puyi with a scheme. They would seize Manchuria and restore the Qing throne over it, forming a new state with Puyi as its emperor. For Puyi, it seemed like a stepping stone to restoring the Qing dynasty, who could rule over all of China again, but he certainly feared becoming a puppet to the Japanese. Dohara planned to kidnap Puyi, but he had a tight timetable as it was going to be necessary to depart from the port of Yingkou, which was soon to freeze over. Therefore, his operation needed to be concluded prior to November the 16th. Dohara was a meticulous man in his work, but his plan was leaked. The Japanese foreign minister, Kujiro Shidehara, had learnt of his scheme to kidnap Puyi, and he instructed the Japanese consul general at Tientsin to oppose Dohara. On November the 1st, the consul general contacted Dohara, but Dohara responded that if the emperor was willing to risk his life by returning to Manchuria, it would be easy to make the entire affair seem as if it was instigated by Qing restorationists. He further added that he would talk to Puyi, and if he was unwilling, he would dispatch a telegram to the military authorities at Mukden to call the entire thing off. The next day, Dohara visited Puyi, and he told him the time was ripe and there would never be an opportunity like this again. He stated Japan would recognize him as the emperor of an independent Manchu state and form a military alliance with said state against China proper if they ever attacked. Puyi dragged his foot on the issue without giving a real concrete answer. Meanwhile, the consul general continued to dissuade Dohara, and a Chinese newspaper in Tientsin called Yishi reported on November the 3rd that Dohara had secretly come to the city and was taking a residence in Tokiwa Hotel. The next day, the same newspaper confirmed Dohara had come to the city a few days ago. Under immense stress, Dohara resorted to a very Dohara scheme. He sent Puyi a bomb in a basket of fruit, with a threatening letter allegedly from the Iron Blood group. He also planned a riot. Dohara hunted down 2,000 Chinese bandits, triad members, soldiers, hooligans, drug addicts, and such for the job. He used the foreign concession as a headquarters, and he began issuing the men weapons procured from Itagaki. They were going to be unleashed on November the 8th, and they would attack targets such as the Hubei Provincial Government Building, the Public Security Bureau, and a police station near the Jing'an Bridge. Allegedly, each man was paid 40 Mexican silver dollars by the Japanese agents. The rioters would be colloquially known as the plainclothes members, as they were dressed in civilian attire. One of their members, a man named Ma Longqing, who was later captured by Chinese authorities, under interrogation stated that he had received arms from the international apartments, i.e., Japanese officials at the concession, and likewise he received training from said Japanese. Here is a direct quote from that man. My detachment was located at number 5, Yuqingli, in the Japanese concession. The detachments were stationed in the international apartments and Hongzhong apartments. We received guns from the international apartments. The first detachment received 20 pistols. The second detachment received 25 pistols. The third and fourth detachments each received 20 pistols. Each gun had 100 bullets. The meal allowance for each person was 1 yuan, 60 cents or 40 cents a day. I received a total of 5,000 yuan. After receiving the guns, the detachments were divided into Zheng Yuan Company, Wu Shangqi, Liao Zhongzhang, and Liu Zhongzhi to deploy defenses in order to attack the Chinese area. The Japanese followed up with guns to supervise us. When we reached the Sino-Japanese border, the Japanese retreated and put up an electric fence. We were caught in a dilemma, and then we were captured. Another captured plainclothes member named Zhang Jinghai gave his life story and involvement during interrogation. He had lived in a small house at Taiko Wharf in Tonggu. He made a living unloading cargo from ships, earning roughly about 20 cents a day. A man had approached him, asking if he would take up a job as a plainclothes member. He agreed, and he went through intense training under Japanese officers every day, and he was paid 20 cents per day. At 1 p.m. one day, he, alongside 7 other members, each carrying a pistol, boarded a train for Tientsin. They were there to assemble at Chuang for further information. However, before he could do so, he was captured at East Station near the East Floating Bridge. The riots were done by 2 separate plainclothes teams, and they were both manipulated and supported by Japan. The first rioted from the evening of November the 8th to noon on the 20th, the second from the 26th to the 30th. On the night of the 8th, the Japanese garrison HQ ordered a large number of plainclothes members to depart the Japanese concession to suddenly and violently attack the Chinese governmental offices. This was intentionally done during a time period in which there was a meeting going on with the League of Nations. That was on the 12th. Therefore, obviously, the Japanese were eager to make it seem like the Chinese hooligans, such as the notorious Green or Red gangs, were creating havoc in Tientsin prior to said meeting. The Japanese hoped this would provide an excuse for not having to withdraw their troops in Manchuria, as the Kwantung Army at this time was attacking the Jinxi area. Many Japanese officers believed the Manchurian army would not resist and simply retreat once the riots broke out. It would mean Tientsin was within their reach and would dramatically alter the North China situation. Wang Xuchang, the chairman of Hubei's provincial government, and Zhang Shuming, the mayor of Tientsin, and director of its security bureau, were informed 3 days prior to the riots from a special agent team of the Public Security Bureau that, quote, "The Japanese military and consulate stationed in Tientsin have instigated our frustrated military personnel, Zhang Bi, Li Jichun, some other leaders of the Tientsin Green and Red gangs, and the famous bandit leaders Xiao Huoyang, Xiao Yongfeng, Guo Pengji, and others, to organize plainclothes members to carry out riots." After receiving said report, Wang Xuchang convened a joint meeting of provincial and municipal military, political, and security officials to come up with countermeasures. He divided the security police teams into groups and he placed them on high alert, issuing out guns and ammunition. He proclaimed during the meeting, "I am a soldier, and I have responsibility to defend my territory. If there are riots and disturbances in Tientsin, we must adapt to the circumstances, use a combination of firmness and flexibility, think carefully, and make appropriate plans to resolve them. But I will never be like Zhang Xiyu." Zhang Xiyu was the chairman of the Liaoning provincial government when Japan attacked Shenyang. "A national sinner, and let the elders and brothers of Tientsin scold me for being incompetent." He then slammed the table and adjourned the meeting. Some gangsters and bandits gathered by the Japanese were familiar with the special forces of the Public Security Bureau. They reported that the uprising was initially planned for the evening of the 7th. However, due to the heightened alert and concerns for the young Emperor Puyi, the Japanese military camp temporarily informed them to postpone the attack to the evening of November the 8th. At that time, the alarm bell at the Japanese military camp in Huagang Temple rang, signaling the plainclothes members to mobilize. Using Datong Apartment to the west of Zhongyuan Company in the Japanese concession and Wangguo Apartment on Farong Street as their bases, they advanced towards Machang Road, Taoxiang Temple, and the Fish Market area, opening fire upon everybody. Simultaneously, the Japanese concession had arranged for security at various key intersections, with the Japanese garrison and military police also deploying together. That very night, over 1,000 volunteers organized by Japanese expatriates in the concession were armed and stationed at important roads. The Japanese military police, believing that the plainclothes teams had been organized as merely a mob incapable of fighting, actually fired weapons in the Japanese concession to rally them. The sounds of gunfire echoed throughout the night. 2 hours prior to the plainclothes team's assault, the security team and the Public Security Bureau implemented the strategy devised by Chairman Wang Xuchang. To manage the ensuing chaos, a temporary curfew was imposed and all traffic at intersections near the Japanese concession was completely halted. The security team set up their defenses in accordance with Chairman Wang Xuchang's directives. He also instructed all officers and soldiers of the 10th Army to prepare for a defense of Tientsin at a standard readiness level and to brace for a large-scale invasion by Japanese forces, perhaps landing in Taunggu. Around 10:30, a plainclothes team approximately of 2,000 individuals emerged from the vicinity of Huanggang Temple in the Japanese concession, following their prearranged plan. The Japanese provided cover and oversight from behind, firing into the Chinese territory. They successfully seized control of 6 stations in the first district of the Public Security Bureau in Nanqi, close to the Japanese concession, as well as another 6 stations in the second district of Huanggang Temple, while separately harassing the south gate of Dongmanlu. The first captain of the security battalion, Bai Longbui, and the third captain, Li Yingpo, led a security team and police in a courageous effort to try and block and repel the attackers step by step. By around noon, the 6 stations in the first district were reclaimed. However, the plainclothes team continued their assaults in various locations. That night, over 10 rioters from the plainclothes team and numerous firearms were captured. Upon inspection, most of the weapons were Japanese-made Type 38 rifles and new guns produced by the Shenyang arsenal in northeast China, which had not yet been delivered to China proper. The riot orchestrated by the plainclothes team under the guidance and manipulation of the Japanese garrison transformed the once thriving Tientsin into a ghost town overnight. Even Asahi Street, typically bustling with activity, was left deserted. At around 1 a.m. on November the 9th, plainclothes teams launched coordinated attacks from various intersections. One group targeted the Public Security Bureau from the northern gate, but was unsuccessful due to heightened security. Meanwhile, another plainclothes unit disrupted the South City and assaulted the 2nd District's 6 offices, leading to a retreat of police forces. The Japanese soldiers then took control of the office and raised their flag. In the southeast corner of the city, at Zhanshan Temple, a fierce battle ensued, ultimately resulting in the defeat of the plainclothes attackers. The Public Security Bureau cavalry and security teams sustained some casualties. By 5 a.m., despite a night of disturbances and looting, the plainclothes teams ultimately failed in their efforts. The Japanese military at Huanggang Temple then resorted to diplomatic tactics, issuing a verbal warning to Zhanshan. They claimed that the Chinese security team had attacked the plainclothes group, resulting in injuries and fatalities amongst Japanese soldiers due to stray bullets, which they argued endangered the lives of overseas Chinese and Japanese concession civilians. They demanded that the Chinese security team and police withdraw 300 meters by 6 a.m., threatening to take action otherwise. This unreasonable demand clearly had ulterior motives. Observing that the plainclothes team, supported and directed by the Japanese army at Huanggang Temple, lacked combat capability, and that the Japanese army was not directly involved, Zhanshan decided to avoid escalating the situation. He ordered a withdrawal of 300 meters from the blocked entrance to the Japanese concession, while maintaining close surveillance. This order was issued and executed at 5:30 a.m. on the 9th. However, the Japanese army violated their promise, and they fired over 30 cannon rounds at 6:40 a.m., with one shell striking at an earthen shed of a store about 100 meters east of the Public Security Bureau. Another shell exploded at the intersection of Saman Road in the Special District No. 2. Fortunately, due to cold weather in the late autumn, most of the people were indoors at the time, and the streets were empty, resulting in no casualties. At that moment, the plainclothes members, supported by Japanese artillery, regrouped near the gate area and launched a significant attack against them. However, due to the security team being on high alert and defending valiantly, the plainclothes team ultimately failed. By noon, the gunfire had diminished, but the Chinese area remained deserted, with no pedestrians in the Japanese concession except for a few Japanese soldiers and residents. At 5 p.m., the plainclothes team initiated another harassment operation in the Wandujiang area outside the South Gate, leading to continued gunfire. After a very fierce battle, the attackers retreated. As the evening progressed, the gunfire became less frequent. According to intelligence reports, the plainclothes team is preparing for a general assault in Tientsin. Wang Shichang and Mayor Zhang have visited various locations to enforce strict precautions and have also telegraphed General Zhang Shiliang in Beiping. However, it remained calm until late in the night of the 9th. On the 9th, 61 plainclothes rioters were apprehended. 10 were shot at the scene, all of whom were leaders involved in the looting, arson, and pillaging going on. 37 were sent to Beiping, and 3 were killed by security team members. The remaining individuals were taken to the 2nd Army headquarters for strict interrogations, and subsequently handed over to the military court for prosecution. It was discovered that the headquarters of the plainclothes rioters were located in Datong Apartment, Wanguo Apartment, and Tanpingle, amongst other sites within the Japanese concession. Before dawn on the 10th, the plaincloths team hurried from the Japanese concession and Huaguang Temple into the Chinese territory. The most intense fighting erupted around the 1st District, the 6 schools, and Nankai Middle School. The sounds of cannon fire and heavy gunfire echoed back and forth. Nankai and Nanxie areas were both shrouded in darkness. 2 fully armed Japanese tanks patrolled along the riverbank, installing fear amongst the citizens of Tientsin. Early on the 10th, the security team bravely searched for gangsters in the conflict zone. By around 7 a.m., they had recovered 5 rifles and 50 rounds of ammunition near Nankai. At 7:45, 26 members of the plaincloths team, along with 7 rifles, numerous gray military uniforms, and 3 flags, were all captured in Shangcai village. Concurrently, 5 rifles and over 30 bullets were also found in a public restroom in the south gate. Subsequently, the plaincloths team attempted several attacks throughout Tientsin, but were thwarted by security teams each time until the 20th. After the Chinese and Japanese sides reached an agreement on restoring Tientsin's status before November the 8th, the defensive structures in the Chinese area were gradually dismantled, leading to steady improvements upon the situation. Around 3 p.m. on November the 22nd, Mayor Zhang dispatched representatives Ning Xiangnan, Shen Jixia, Zhu Ruchen, Jack Guofu, along with the Japanese leader Goto, staff officer Mura, and translator Yoshida, to conduct a follow-up inspection of the Dongmailu area after the defenses were removed. The order in the area was commendable, and the defensive installations in the Japanese concession had also been taken down. Both parties expressed satisfaction with the outcome, and all the shops in the Japanese concession were open for business. However, at 8 p.m. on November the 26th, gunfire erupted once more, accompanied by the sounds of machine guns and artillery. Sudden gunshots rang out from Shiguangkai and the White Bone Tower, which appeared to be a covert signal. Machine gun fire was reported in the southeast corner of the city, near the Kawasaki Foreign Company in the Japanese concession, as well as at the gate, Nanguan Xiaotuo, Huaguang Temple, and other locations. Simultaneously, the booming of motors echoed throughout the city, plunging it into a state of panic. Japanese officers took direct command of the operations, targeting the Dongfukqiao Public Security Bureau and the Jingguangqiao Provincial Government. The artillery was aimed towards Huaguang Temple at the gate. Fortunately, both locations were unoccupied and the shells fired did not cause any damage. By around 7 p.m., the Japanese had repositioned the electric fences in the Japanese concession, stacked sandbags, and heightened their alertness. Additional infantry police were deployed at key intersections, and the Japanese organized volunteer army was also mobilized. The gate was in close proximity to the Public Security Bureau at Dongfu Bridge, making the situation particularly tense. The plaincloths team gathered on Main Street near the gate, while the Japanese army strictly prohibited pedestrians from passing through. The Mitsu and Company building, which was quite tall and faced the Hahu River, allowed access to the Public Security Bureau along the river. The Japanese had also prepared command flags in advance to direct the plaincloths team members for an assault upon the gate. The situation was quite critical at the southern end of Nongguang Street, particularly at the intersection of Nanxie and China, as well as at the southeast corner of the city. Key locations within the Japanese concession, including Zhanshan Pharmacy, Xinming Grand Theater, Zhangyuan Company, the Japanese Public Hospital, Liaozhaozhuang Silk Shop, Taishan Pawn Shop, and Chengduli Building were all under tight security. Consequently, this second plaincloths riot was coordinated by the Japanese to undermine the public security in Tientsin, aligning with developments in the northeast, of course, with the ultimate goal of further occupying and seizing Tientsin. On the 27th, a plaincloths unit operating under Japanese command launched a fierce attack upon the gate around 1 a.m., retreating only after facing a pretty fierce counterattack by the security forces. Beginning on the 28th, the Japanese military significantly increased its troop presence, creating a tense atmosphere, and compelled the Tientsin authorities to withdraw the security teams back to Hubei and to dismantle all the fortifications. This allowed the Japanese army to bolster its military presence in Tientsin, although they were unable to gain any real control over the city. While the plaincloths riots were being planned, Dohara was talking with Puyi. On November the 3rd, Dohara met with him at the Jingyuan Garden in Tientsin. Within his memoirs, Puyi stated Dohara was a Japanese soldier who had made his entire career by invading China. He was 48 years old when he was speaking, and the muscles around his eyes showed signs of relaxation. He had a small mustache, and his face was always gentle, and he acted quite respectfully. His smile always gave the impression that everything he said was unreliable, however. He asked me about my health, and then we got down to business. He first explained that the Japanese army's actions were only aimed at Zhangshiliang, saying that Zhangshiliang made Manchuria miserable, and the rights and lives and property of the Japanese could not be guaranteed, so Japan had no choice but to send troops. He said that the Kwangtung army had no territorial ambitions for Manchuria, but only sincerely wanted to help the Manchurian people and build their own new country. He hoped that I would not miss this opportunity to return to the birthplace of my ancestors, so I could lead this country in person. Japan would sign an offensive and defensive alliance with this country, and its sovereign territory would be fully protected by Japan. As the head of this country, I could do everything on my own. Puyi was extremely wary of the entire thing. Here is a transcript of their conversation as told to us through the memoirs of Puyi. I still had a very important question in mind, so I asked, "What kind of country is this new country?" "I have already said that it is independent and autonomous, and the Emperor, Shuangtong, has the final say." "That's not what I'm asking. I want to know whether this country is a republic or a monarchy. Is it an empire?" "These problems can be solved in Shenyang." "No," I insisted. "If it is a restoration, I will go. Otherwise, I will not go." He smiled, and he said in the same tone, "Of course it's an empire, and there's no problem with that." "If it's an empire, I can go." I expressed my satisfaction. "Then please ask Emperor Shuangtong to leave as soon as possible and arrive in Manchuria before the 16th. We will discuss the details when we arrive in Shenyang. Yoshida will arrange the departure." Afterwards, Dohara congratulated Puyi on his safe journey, bowing respectfully to him. After Dohara left, Puyi met with Jinliang, who came with Dohara. He brought further news from Manchuria, of the veterans led by Yuan Qingkai, stating that they could call upon the old Northeast Army to surrender. After enduring various forms of coercion, inducement, threats, and intimidation, Puyi was concealed in the trunk of a two-seater saloon car on the evening of November the 10th, just 3 days following the Tientsin Incident. As planned, he was driven out to Jingyuan. With the covert protection of the Japanese Secret Service, he changed into Japanese military attire, and then he took a vehicle from the Japanese military headquarters. He reached the British concession pier without any obstacles and boarded a very small, unlit motorboat. Subsequently, he quickly fled to Dagukao under the escort of more than 10 Japanese soldiers. He was then promptly transferred to the Japanese merchant ship Awajumaru, arriving at the Manchurian Railway Pier in Yinko City on the 13th. On November the 18th, the Kwangtung Army moved Puyi to the Dahe Hotel in Loshun, where he was closely protected. Later, on March the 1st of 1932, under the direction of the Kwangtung Army, the puppet state of Manchukuo was officially declared established. Puyi assumed the role of ruler of this puppet regime on March the 9th. 2 years later, his title was changed to Emperor, and at this point the Japanese invaders had successfully achieved their objective of holding Puyi hostage and establishing the puppet Manchukuo regime. Despite the Chinese army's efforts to quell the plainclothes rioters, Japan seized upon the pretext of, quote, endangering the lives of Japanese expatriates in the Japanese concession, to insist that the Chinese security forces withdraw 300 meters from the border of the concession. They threatened to take unilateral action if their demands were not met. On the 15th, during negotiations, the Northeast Army authorities conceded to Japan's unreasonable requests. Nevertheless, Japan proceeded to bombard the Hubei provincial and municipal government buildings and the police station with their artillery. Following the suppression of the second plainclothes riot, the Japanese, feeling humiliated by their foiled plans, sought new excuses and made further unreasonable demands. They now insisted that the Chinese army withdraw from Tientsin, and that the local populace refrain from anti-Japanese activities. Concurrently, they deployed additional troops to Tientsin, using intimidation tactics against the Chinese. The nationalist government ultimately acquiesced to Japan's demands, ordering the security team, primarily made up of the Northeast Army, to retreat to what is now the Hubei district on November the 29th. As the soldiers withdrew from their positions, tears were certainly shed, and the onlookers mourned their departure. Beginning on December the 1st, the streets in the Japanese concession were illuminated, and Japanese merchants displayed flags to celebrate their perceived victory. They even coerced Chinese residents into hanging Japanese flags under threat of imprisonment. The contrast was stark between the Tientsin security team's defeat, which felt like a loss without any actual defeat, and the Japanese invaders' hollow victory. Several Chinese soldiers who distinguished themselves in the fight against the invasion were reassigned from Tientsin. Despite failing in the riot, the Japanese successfully executed their plan to secretly extract Puyi from Tientsin and compelled the Chinese army to withdraw. This paved the way for a series of conspiratorial events, including the Jiaodong Incident, Hubei Incident, Zhongbei Incident, and ultimately these actions led to their proposal for a North China Autonomy Zone, and the July 7th Marco Polo Bridge Incident that'll take place in 1937. This marks a gradual realization of their true ambitions to invade China. I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to also produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War found on major podcast platforms. Over on YouTube, I released a rather silly episode covering how to play the USSR and Axis of Allies, that is a board game. And over on Echoes of War, we just completed our 4-part series covering who are the best and worst generals, admirals, and air commanders of World War II. If you'd like to further support me, please check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. The latest episode over in the exclusive series is how the Sicilian Mafia helped the Allies during World War II. All the proceeds from my YouTube membership and my Patreon account go directly to paying animators to make some incredible documentaries. I have a lot of stuff cooking up, so stay tuned. And thus, with that, our old dear friend Dohara performed yet another scheme to push forward with the Japanese invasion of China. It's sad to say it won't be his last. The invasion of Manchuria was coming to a swift end, and soon a new puppet state would take hold. But would Japan stop with just the Northeast?